Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's panel. This is the sixth panel in the Reimagined series. It's called Nova Scotia's Promise, Reimagined, and we are so happy to have you with us tonight. So before we get started on the content, I want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded and ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. So my name is Laurie Turnbull. I am the director of the School of Public Administration here at Dalhousie, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. I'm going to tell you, before I introduce our panelists, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project. The Reimagine project started in the Faculty of Management here at Dalhousie, and we started talking about, a while ago, this was months ago, we started to talk about the particular conditions affecting Nova Scotia this year. I think for everybody around the world, 2020 has been an unprecedented year, an unprecedented experience. COVID-19 has been absolutely unprecedented in terms of its existence as a public health crisis, an economic crisis. And we're only, we're still in the midst of it in terms of that we see numbers rising across the country, around the world. We see Nova Scotia's experience having to shut businesses down, having to shut public places down. So, in no sense are we kind of out of the eye of this. To the contrary, we're not. But we did start thinking several months ago about Nova Scotia's experience in particular. So not only having to deal with the realities of a pandemic, both public health and economic, but also we have seen the largest mass shooting in the country's history. We are, like many jurisdictions around the world, dealing with and grappling with the legacies of colonialism and racism. And all of those experiences together, I think, make for a very profound and impactful experience that is uniquely Nova Scotian. And so we talked about how researchers at the Faculty of Management and Dalhousie more broadly could get involved in a positive way in efforts towards rebuilding and reimagining Nova Scotia. And so what we did was identify themes that were really important to that rebuilding exercise. And the past 5 panels that we've had for the Reimagined series, each of them has been devoted to one of those themes. And so each theme was explored by a team of researchers, community leaders, practitioners. What we wanted to do was kind of take a table of people who don't necessarily always sit together, but are all experts in a particular field. And instead of having a major research exercise, which is extremely valuable and important, but takes a long time and kind of might take years of work, what we wanted to do was hit the ground running on some innovative thinking in each of these 5 areas. And so we brought together some really smart people to do some thinking and writing and talking about those things. And so what we're doing tonight is kind of taking all of those lessons together and looking forward, and looking at what Nova Scotia could look like, what we have to do to get there. And we want this to be, this is our final session. And so we're sort of taking stock of what we've learned, and then we're looking forward with that. And so I know the panelists that you're about to hear from are going to tell us a lot of what we need to know about that. And we're very, very pleased to have a very esteemed panel with us tonight. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I'm going to tell you who the panelists are, and then I'm going to turn things over to them. And so the panelists this evening are the Honourable Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard, Mr. Danny Graham, and Dr. Alice Aiken. And so first, I'm going to turn things over to Senator Wanda Thomas Bernard. Senator Wanda is a wonderful community leader. She is a full professor in the School of Social Work here at Dalhousie, where she was once director. And I'm going to turn things over to Senator Wanda because I'm so looking forward to hearing what she has to say to us tonight. So, Senator, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Laurie. So let me say thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this session. When I think about all the trauma and the collision of pandemics, so we had the pandemic of COVID and the pandemic of racism gaining global recognition, really, after the midday murder of Mr. George Floyd and all of the other systemic racism state racism things that we've seen, both in the US and in Canada, the mass shooting and the trauma that that has caused. And I think that one of the things that we're seeing is you have this collision of all of these things happening and people trying to find a way to make sense of it all, people trying to find a way to move forward. And so I commend the Faculty of Management at Dalhousie for your Reimagined project. I've looked at the work that each of your study groups have done. I've looked at their recommendations, and I've actually given this a lot of thought. The whole idea of innovative thinking and really looking at how to move forward at a time when people are really struggling. And one of the things that COVID has revealed for everybody is actually the state of disparities in our society and right here in Nova Scotia. So we see the disparities. They've become much more visible. And so we're seeing the impact of COVID impacting different communities differently. So when I think of this whole idea of reimagine Nova Scotia, and I try to sort of think through, well, what does that actually mean for me? I try to center myself in the discussion and thinking about this Reimagine project. And I came up with this single statement. I've been reimagining Nova Scotia for most of my adult life. I've been reimagining a Nova Scotia where everyone is truly a part of this wonderful province that we call home. For years, I've reimagined spaces where equity is the first order of business in all of our organizations, in all of our institutions. I've reimagined a province that takes our history very, very seriously, that takes that history of colonialism seriously, that truly strives for reconciliation with Mi'kmaq and other Indigenous people that live in our province, that were here before anyone else. And I've spent years reimagining what life for our ancestors, those of us of African descent, I've spent years reimagining what life would have been like if they had been given equal opportunities when they were first brought to these shores. I've tried to imagine what it would be like if African Nova Scotians, if my ancestors had opportunities to thrive, to engage, to participate, to be considered full members of our society. And that led me to, as I was thinking about this evening and thinking about participating on this panel this evening, I was reminded of the Office of African Nova Scotian Affairs and the exercise that they've done in relation to the Decade for People of African Descent and the action plan that they developed and released last year, Count Us In. And the vision itself, I think, speaks volumes. The vision is that African Nova Scotians prosper and can equitably and respectfully access and participate in all facets of Nova Scotian society. So when I think about reimagining Nova Scotia, I reimagine a Nova Scotia where all Nova Scotians, regardless of age, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, regardless of ability. We're all Nova Scotians. Prosper. Achieve equity. And respectfully access everything that Nova Scotia has to offer. Why are we fighting each other? Why aren't we more cooperative? So I imagine a Nova Scotia where we all have the opportunity to participate in all facets of Nova Scotian society. And then I ask myself, so what's holding us back? Why aren't we there? Surely this is not a new idea. Surely this is not something that, Wanda Thomas Bernard just thought about. Surely this is something that people have thought about, have been working on for generations. And what's holding us back? What's preventing us from putting that reimagined Nova Scotia into reality? From moving from that creation to action, from the creation of an idea to action. What's holding us back? That's what I'd like to engage in some conversation about this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Wanda. That was wonderful, and that's such an important way to kick off the panel tonight. I'm going to welcome next Danny Graham. Danny is at Engage Nova Scotia. He and many of us know him from his previous life as leader of the Liberal Party. So I want to give a warm welcome to Danny. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Laurie. I just want to acknowledge the panelists with whom I'm spending time this evening, and with Senator Thomas Bernard and with Dr. Aiken. It's a real privilege for me to be part of this conversation and to be in the reimagine question. So I'm a descendant of Scottish settlers, Senator, and we've been around for a while, but nowhere near the amount of time, obviously, that Mi'kmaq people have been on this land, and many others for that matter. So I come to this conversation with questions more than answers, and curiosity and a love for this province that I think is in keeping what I think this initiative is about. So congratulations to Dalhousie for the School of Public Administration to put this together and to sort of meet us at this particularly precious time in the question of what it is that we want to be as Nova Scotians. And so I think the invitation in this last panel is to sort of take a wide perspective on the questions that we have as Nova Scotians. And when I think about that, I go back at least 100 years to the many reports that have been written about our future that have predominantly focused on the questions of our economic and demographic future, which were, of course, pressing issues. And in fact, when you look at the big picture of things, Nova Scotia hasn't done that badly. But when you compare ourselves to other parts of North America, it feels like we've been craving to be like other places in this continent, and not appreciating the wider perspective about how we've done as Nova Scotians in the larger scheme of things. So for about 100 years now, almost a century, we've been writing reports about reimagining Nova Scotia, and much of it has focused on how we have trailed economically, and we've failed to grow our population the way that other jurisdictions have. And to a certain extent, it makes me think that we've actually become insecure and unclear about who we are as a people and where we're going. It's clearest to me right now that how others see us depends on how we see ourselves, and the extent to which we recognize our strengths and our potential and our challenges is really the determiner about whether or not we'll be able to realize the future that we deserve and want. So along comes 2020, the pandemic, that collectively seems to have stopped us in our tracks. And here's what I'm struck by in this particular year, that I think we've recognized more deeply the concerns and challenges that we have. Senator Thomas Bernard just pointed very clearly to the inequities that have been around for generations in our province for reasons of race and ethnicity, income, age. When one looks at the challenges of child poverty in Nova Scotia, we have enormous challenges and concerns. And it also has revealed in this time our opportunities and our advantages, I think. This is a province of strong relationships. This is a province of natural beauty. This is a province where people, I think, as individuals are more ready to lean into the question of what matters most. What does it mean to have friends and family and have work-life balance? And to ensure that together we have physical and mental wellness. Those questions, I think, have become surfaced for us as a collective and as individuals in ways that no other year could possibly have given us the opportunity to peer into at this particular time. So soon we'll start to move. And the question that really is in front of us is whether we're going to continue to move in the same direction that we've always moved in, or whether, in fact, we just take a pause and say, I'm not sure if I want to chase that. And I'm not sure if I want to continue to see people in my community experiencing that. And there's another peak in that mountain range that we've been walking toward that feels more attractive for me as an individual and for us as a collective people. The work that we've been doing at Engage Nova Scotia has been substantially focused on this notion of improving people's quality of life. And just this past August, we asked Nova Scotians 2 questions. On a scale of 1 to 10, we should measure our success by growing the economy. And when we calculated who answered in Nova Scotia at level 7, 8, 9, or 10, the response was about 58% of people. And then we repeated that question, but we asked them the extent to which, on a scale of 1 to 10, we should measure our success by improving our quality of life. And on that question, 82% of Nova Scotians answered 7, 8, 9, or 10. And so those 2 issues are actually interdependent. People's quality of life that we have for each other and our economic conditions. But it's especially important for people who have been underrepresented for a long period of time. People with disabilities, single parents, BIPOC, low-income communities of people who deserve and are calling now for this being an inflection point for us as Nova Scotians to sort of move forward. I think the role that universities can play in the potential to amplify the questions and the opportunities before us has never been greater. So I'm so delighted that Dalhousie has chosen this opportunity to sort of say, okay, where as a province are we all going together? Where are the public, private, academic, and community sectors all sort of bridging the opportunity to dig deep and to take advantage of the pause that we have to realize our full potential? I'm not sure where this will take us, but I think that the potential in front of us as Nova Scotians has never been greater. As people reflect on their quality of life everywhere, they're looking for places of beauty where they can connect to others, where they can imagine an inclusive society that ensures that as a people, we've got each other's back. Our story in that regard has had, and in this year, really incredible examples of how we've had each other's back. But it's also revealed many ways where people have obviously been slipping between the cracks. The housing insecurity that is being exposed increasingly, especially for low-income people in HRM, is a clear example of how we can do better And our hope is that in the reimagining of where we're going as a people, that we don't perpetuate the centuries-old history that we have of privileging the voices of the people who have access to those who make decisions to imagine that new future. What we need to do, I think, as we look at the future, is to consider who hasn't been part of this conversation up until now, and how can we include them in the conversation about our future. And I think if we do that well, if we take this precious opportunity of pause to include everyone in the conversation about reimagining Nova Scotia, then not only will I think we get there, but we will be an example, as we have been an example in a number of environmental and social issues in Nova Scotia, to the rest of the country and perhaps to the rest of the world, about what it's like to be in a place that's more vibrant, inclusive, and adaptive to change. Thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be part of this conversation.
Danny, thank you so much for that. That was really, really refreshing. And I'd really like to hear more. One thing that I might follow up with you on later, and all the panelists, is how we can use data and information to try to move the Reimagine, the goals of the Reimagine project, not so much the project in itself, but kind of how we move this whole exercise. But I'll come back to you on that. And so for our third panelist, I'm going to welcome Dr. Alice Aiken. She is the Vice President of Research and Innovation here at Dalhousie. So welcome, Alice.
Thank you so much, Laurie. And thank you to the organizers for inviting me and for also putting me on a panel with Senator Wanda and Danny Graham. They're really wonderful to listen to what both of you have just said. And I won't, while I agree wholeheartedly, I won't repeat anything you said. I look forward to the discussion. You know, I think it's very easy to look at how COVID has shown the flaws in many institutions, for good and for bad. I mean, if you don't see a flaw, you can't address it. But also, if a flaw was niggling, it came into stark relief. But it's also given us a chance to reimagine Nova Scotia. And I really take my hat off to Dean Kim Brooks and the whole Faculty of Management for embarking on this project and engaging everybody across the university, but across the province as well in thinking about this. You know, right up front, things that we thought could never happen, happened. We saw telemedicine within 48 hours of COVID hitting. Telemedicine that could never be possible before because of structures that were in place, not because we couldn't do it. Suddenly it happened. You know, and for us in the university sector, people had to turn to online learning, and our faculty stepped up like champions to make this happen. And I've even heard from some faculty that they were able to do things that they hadn't been able to get, guest speakers and things that they hadn't been able to do before, because they suddenly were working from anywhere in the world. You know, though this does bring, and you know, I stayed abreast of the Reimagine project, but I reviewed it all again before we were coming to this panel. And what came up in the learning and working in particular is digital access. And I really think what's needed, one of the things that we really need to consider is digital equity. You know, we don't have equal access to digital resources, and it is going to be a way we do a lot of things in the future, as we've noticed now. It's not that we don't want to get back to in-person things, but imagine what a university like Dalhousie, which, you know, is the academic heartbeat of Nova Scotia, could be like if our students could be anywhere in the world, or if our faculty could be anywhere in the world, and we're able to showcase Nova Scotia in the globe and showcase what we do here so exceptionally well. And it's not just us, it's all our partners. When you look at the number of startups, highest number of ocean startups in North America, second fastest growing tech sector in Canada. We have the highest proportion of post-secondary educated people in North America, and we're top 10 in the world. We have something to brag about here. And now that we've gone really online and digital, we've really got something to showcase and to brag about. But also to help, to be part of the world, to be part of what is happening out there now, and bringing Nova Scotia to the world. You know, we saw it through the wave one, and I know we're just heading into a lockdown again, not a lockdown, but some restrictions again for COVID. But look how well we did with our partners in Atlantic Canada through wave one of COVID. Suddenly the whole world knew about us and knew we could do things well and knew we could work together for a common good. And stuff like that to me is so Nova Scotian and so Atlantic Canadian. I think the world needs more of us right now. And perhaps COVID has presented us with that opportunity, and wonderful people like the group who did the Reimagine project are really thinking about how we can do that. And in doing that, how do we help our province become everything it can be and everything we all know it can be? So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Alice. And your comments made me think about, too, this might be something that comes up a bit more in the questions or for later discussion down the road, but the important role that universities play in economic resilience, and particularly in our region. I think a project like this, the hope was not for Dalhousie to kind of control the conversation, but instead to kind of work with people who are experts and who are practitioners and who are Nova Scotians. And I think this this project gives me a lot of hope around a really interesting, innovative role that universities can play, not only in lifelong learning, but also in community building and partnering and forward looking. I think problem solving. I think it's really, really important. So I want to thank all of the panelists for their opening comments, because I think, already we've learned a lot. We've got a lot to think about here. And so I think at this point, we're going to jump in with some comments and questions, and we will make it possible for the audience to give us their questions so that the panelists can respond. We've got a little bit of time to do that. But I think I'd like to start, if I can, with a question that we talked about a bit. We're looking at the goals that we have, the kind of broad goals we have in this project, and those are reflective not just of the work that was done connected to this project directly, but also, as Senator Wanda said, thoughts we've all had around reimagining Nova Scotia. The Reimagine project didn't start with this particular exercise. We've all been thinking about how we can move forward. And so I wonder if I can pose the question to the panelists. I mean, not just what stops us, right? Like what is actually stopping us from, what are the obstacles, what are the barriers that we can point to for making progress on the kind of things that matter to us, including the goals of this project and more broadly? Now, sometimes it helps if I put people on the spot. Sometimes people get angry when I do that. But I will take that risk on behalf of everyone, and I might jump to the senator first if I can, just to get her comments on that.
And you know what? I'm going to have to ask you to, I missed the first part of the question.
Okay.
It doesn't happen in an online environment.
Totally. So yeah, I wanted us to chat for a bit about, given the goals of the project, and not only this project, but more broadly, how we all think about reimagining Nova Scotia. Are there things that stand in our way? Are there barriers? Are there obstacles? Are there things that we just need to deal with before we can make progress like we've talked about today?
I think sometimes we stand in our own way. So let me tell you what I mean by that. I think we can get so bogged down with making sure we have the right people at the table, the right decision makers in a room, the right policies before us, that we sometimes lose track of what the core issues really are. And we do live and operate in a capitalist society. So it's a society that sets us up to compete as opposed to cooperating. I think the Reimagine project requires greater cooperation. I think that we need to be able to name what the barriers are. And I also think that sometimes the privilege we carry may hold us back, may get in the way, may block us from moving forward, because sometimes in our privileged spaces, we get used to a certain things happening in a certain way, in a particular way. And maybe some ideas, maybe somewhat outside of what those typical ways of being, ways of knowing are. And so we're maybe not so used to, not so open to hearing new ideas and new suggestions. And our privilege can be pretty invisible to us. So I think those are some things to start the conversation going. I think those are things that can block us.
Maybe I'll take a stab at this question, because it's one that I wake up with on a regular basis, and I don't want to point to something that's nebulous or opaque to a certain extent, but I think it's really concrete from my perspective as somebody who's sort of lived in all parts of Nova Scotia over the years. I think the issue comes down to confidence. I think we've been told a story, and we bought a story that really was told to us by other places that we thought were successful, Toronto, New York, wherever else, in part because we looked at them and we started to think, well, looks like the good life. And to a certain extent, there are a number of things that those jurisdictions have done well. But there was an incomplete picture that was being painted for us that didn't allow us to see all the strengths and assets that we have now. So I actually do believe that through a number of periods that I think, and I know that, there are different perspectives about the One Nova Scotia process. I was part of that to a certain extent. And I think everyone would agree that it was a really helpful contribution to where we're going, but an incomplete one as a province. And for the last period of time since the One Nova Scotia process, and particularly in this year, I think there's something about us seeing ourselves more deeply, the strengths that we have, and the ways in which we have held each other in this time, and have tremendous potential. As Alice was saying a little bit a while ago, we're in a period where, unlike my dad's period, and to a certain extent my own, people aren't chasing jobs, jobs are chasing people, people are chasing places. What better place to live than Nova Scotia, Canada? This part of the world demonstrably is a place that has a lot of work to do, especially around inequities, but clearly has an advantage that we didn't quite know ourselves, because we believed a story that someone else was telling us about what a good life looked like. So I'm hopeful that through this exercise and many others that complement it, we'll begin to see ourselves with greater confidence than we have up until now, and know that, not be lured into somebody else's story about who we can be, and own the truth about the challenges and concerns that we have, and the opportunities and advantages that are right in front of us.
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I came back to Nova Scotia 5 years ago, and I had lived here when I was younger. I was in the Navy and then went to Dalhousie, and when I came back, I was so blown away by what the province was doing, and how far they had come, and how warmly I was embraced coming back here by people within the community. And, and I tell people about it all over Canada, all over the world. And yet when you tell Nova Scotians about it, they downplay it, to Danny's point, right? It's, oh yeah. And we're living in a world where startups are the thing. And I say Nova Scotians are primed for that because they loved a province that didn't have a lot of resource beyond fishing. They became great at home and cottage industries. Well, now it's all fancy and they call it startups, but Nova Scotians are still great at it, right? And we need to see that and see that in ourselves.
I think, can I build on this? I think in social work, we would use the terms. We're used to using a lens of a deficit perspective. So we're used to looking at our province from a deficit lens and not from a strengths lens. So I think that going forward, if we can train people to rethink, so part of the reimagining needs to be reimagining the strengths that we have in this province. What are the things that we can build on, as opposed to looking at what are the deficits, what are the things we don't have? I absolutely agree with the point you're making about us having someone else tell the story or viewing our story from someone else's lens and someone else's reality. So let's look at what we have around us and let's bring a strengths perspective to this work.
I really like that. There's a lot of richness to draw on for sure. So on that note, on a positive note, I wonder if we can talk a bit about how COVID, our experience with COVID and some of the changes we've made, how much is that going to stay with us? Like Alice mentioned, a very quick turn to telehealth and things like that. I mean, it strikes me that there are some processes and some ways of doing things that cropped up during COVID almost in response to an emergency situation that actually have turned out to be pretty good. And we may want to continue those things now that we've started them. But there might also be some things that don't stay with us as much. And I wonder if there are, like, for instance, during COVID, we saw rising levels of trust in institutions and in leaders. And I think, that's not unusual in a time of crisis. But I wonder, was any of that transformative to a fuller extent, or was that just sort of a blip on the radar because we needed it at the time? And so, not that I want to lock in this conversation on trust, not at all, but I just wonder, I mean, are we seeing changes here that are going to stay with us for the positive or for the negative? Or do you think there will be a time where this is really just the changes around COVID are a thing of the past and we're kind of back to some kind of normal?
I'll make a crack at that one if you guys are okay. I think sometimes what prevents us from being innovative or from doing something is really the structures that are in place. And when push comes to, like, telemedicine's perfect. Well, doctors couldn't bill to do telemedicine. Well, suddenly they could bill to do telemedicine. So why would you stop that? It makes no sense. I think trust in public institutions, you're right, does go up in a time of crisis. And what we saw was our medical officer of health and our premier be very clear in their communications, be very trustworthy in their communications, and people needed somewhere to look too, because we've never lived through anything like this. So that helped. Will it stay that way in the political realm? I don't know. But my gut is telling me maybe not. So, but I do think there are some things that we've learned, and another tiny example I'll give, but online learning. I always say, when I walked into my first year biology class, it wasn't at Dal was my second degree, but my first year biology class at a bigger university, I walked into what I thought was the front of the class. I was halfway up an amphitheater. There were 500 people in my first year biology class. So I never asked a question. I never talked to the professor. I mean, I went to every class, but I wasn't engaged in that class. I was engaged in my biology labs when there was a group of 12 of us working with a TA. We need to really think, do we need to have a bunch of people in a big lecture hall anymore? Is that where anyone's doing meaningful learning? Or can we really rethink what it means to be in the academy, what it means to be learning in the academy? That's just another example I would give.
I think one of the things that truly keeps me worried and awake at night is actually the inequities. And for as much as I absolutely agree that a lot of positive things and unanticipated positive things have happened because of COVID, reality is we're also seeing more inequities. So when I think about access to online, for example, and I've been teaching online for over 20 years. I was the first person in our school to do distance education. And I mean, I love the opportunities that it presents. But I also know that there are people who don't have access to high-speed internet. I know there are people who don't have access to computers, who don't have access to technology in their homes. Even if they have access to high-speed internet, but they don't have the technology. They don't have those skills. So there are people who are totally locked outside of that. And unless the Reimagine project going forward, we need to make sure that equity is ensured. We need to build equity into all of these developments that are coming forward. And even with telemed is absolutely wonderful. But I think about that woman who's experiencing intimate partner violence and who's having health issues because of that, and whose partner is home because the partner's not working because of COVID. She's not going to be able to safely engage in conversation about health issues that may be caused by the intimate partner violence, or that may be a result of the intimate partner violence. So for all of these things that are wonderful and they're moving us forward, and it's absolutely wonderful, but let's keep looking behind to see who's being left behind, who's being left out, who's negatively impacted by every decision and choice that we make. And how do we make it better? How do we make it different? How do we create those opportunities for people to learn technology, for people to have safe ways to communicate, to address issues of violence that may be going on? What are some of the things that we can be doing to make it better, to make it possible for people to safely access? And then don't even get me going into issues of racism and how some of the worst racism we've seen through COVID. I think it's really easy for us to think about all of the positive things that have come through COVID. But I also think about some of the racism. My daughter had an experience literally just last week when she had to go into a shop for something. And there were other people in the shop. This is a big store she was in. And they had a person who's cleaning the aisles after, but only after certain people. So there was someone following her and cleaning after everything she touched, but she's watching other people who didn't look like her shop, and the cleaner wasn't cleaning after them. Like, that is so offensive. That kind of racism is so offensive, but it's still happening. And what do? Do you deal with it in the moment, or do you get your shopping done and get out of the store? And that's going on. The person who someone spits on a Chinese person on a bus in Vancouver because they're being blamed for this violence. So these things are happening, and we must name them and make sure that we're addressing them, because they can block the reimagined Nova Scotia. They can block the Nova Scotia that we desire, that we're aiming to move to.
Absolutely.
There's a lot there. I won't. I agree with everything that's been said. It's. I'm really cautious about trying to forecast what happens from here. The last 5-10 years have been enormous in its own concentration of systems thinking and all the ways in which we have been challenged into an invitation to be different. And we've also seen during the course of that the surfacing of the pus, if you will, of some really messy beliefs that aren't about anything close to what it means to be in solidarity with each other. And that's going to represent a challenge for some period of time. So I'm really cautious about saying what's going to happen next. But I appreciate the point that you've made, Laurie, about the importance of trust. And there are a number of things in this year that are undoubtedly creating significant inflection points. And I think that we need to fight for what is possible from here. So StatsCan just released recent data that shows that people's satisfaction with life is going in the wrong direction since the pandemic. So people are suffering relative to where they were before the pandemic. And at the same time, trust, which is the oxygen of any society, is growing with respect to some, and that's against the current that has been happening for a generation now, where trust in government, media, business, NGOs has been declining. So there's a mixture of something that's happening right now that's difficult to sort of imagine what's happening next. But what's clearest to me is that this is a time that if you believe in something, it's a step up, don't give up kind of moment for all of us, and to get on the playing field a little bit. And it's almost exciting to a certain extent, not to glamorize it, because I know how much this is a challenge to many people.
I think you're absolutely right, though. I mean, we can't discount. We've had a lot of conversations about structure here, but we can't discount the importance of agency and everybody owning this on a personal level. And that's a big, I think, to me, on the question of going back to that question of barriers, that's a big part of it, is people understanding their own role in being part of a solution. And that's not an overnight thing. That's an individual and a collective long-term thing. So thank you so much for taking my questions. Now, I would love to take a question or two from the audience so that there can be some direct communication here. Okay, so where do we start? How do we identify leaders? That's a great question.
I love that question. Mm-hmm. I say we need to see ourselves as leaders. I want to pick up on a point Danny just made. We must fight for what we know is right. If someone hasn't tweeted that out, you must do that. That's leadership. When we fight and take a stand for what we know is right and find the courage to do that, that's leadership. So find those leadership qualities within yourself and look at, what's an action plan I can create, and then who can I do that work with?
Agree.
Jolene, great question. A short answer from my perspective, at least, and this is all, it's a pretty personal question, the way that I orient myself to this. And the way that I try my best to answer this is actually, I start with me and all the judgment that I am prone to sort of insert into the way that I show up for others. And so to the extent that I'm able to sort of find a place where I'm trying my best to understand that everybody's got a story and you got to walk in the moccasins of somebody else, and at the same time be clear about what you believe in, is that those are all personal questions. And if we are able to sort of hold our ground and make sure that it's not just about our perspective about the other, but it's our perspective about ourselves, that allows us to be a resource for others, and I'm going to use my flakies 90s terms with my own one's own sort of energy source to be of service to others, then that's that's going to make the difference, I think. But it can't be about one's assessment of everything out there without doing the assessment of starting with the assessment of oneself and how you're oriented to all of that.
Yeah, Jolene, and thanks for being here, and thanks for the question. I really believe to lead is to serve. And so where can we find leaders? Danny's point and Wanda's point, we are the leaders, right? We have to be, and really to get anywhere, it has to be about team and mission. So where are we, what's the mission? What are you working on? And who are your people? And I think that's how we all lead to make this successful.
I think that, yeah, I mean, those are really, really good points. And leadership is a tough one. It's something that we, like in public administration, in all fields, we spend a lot of time thinking about what leadership means and how it's effective. And sometimes I think that personal introspection is so important, because without it, you're not aware of how, like that, as you said, like how are you showing up to people, and what kind of energy are you bringing, and how are you empowering people to do what they need to do. And so I think, we've hit on some really important points here. I'm going to wait. I'm going to suppress my own urge to ask another question, and I'm going to wait for an audience question to come up, just because we've just got a few minutes left. If this is the disruptive change that is forced to shift or pivot, what are the incremental changes? So first, next steps to keep momentum. That's a great question. Right, I'm supposed to put someone on the spot now. I forgot that. Oh no. Danny, do you want to take a crack at this one?
It's an excellent question, because there is this. Here's my belief as a Nova Scotian. I wake up every morning and I think about the province as soon as my feet hit the ground, and it puts me to bed, and then it's just my thing. And so there's this big picture notion of what needs to happen, and I appreciate the practical nature of Sean's question in all of this. And the two need to be bridged. My view is that we have been preoccupied by short-term solutions and not sufficiently on the deep challenges that we have. Nonetheless, what are the things that could be done? We need to look at economic inequality is at the root, from my perspective, of so much of what is happening. So minimum wage, living wage, shelter affordability, inclusion as a province, having conversations that go beyond just HRM in some fashion, bringing people together who have not been part of the conversation. So that we've heard the terms Build Back Better, we should be asking the question, who's in the room when we build back better? Is it only people who have always been there, or look and sound like the folks who have always been there? Or are there ways that we can ensure that, and I appreciate what my profile is in all of this. I'm not a first voice person. I think we should be saying, let's make sure that we have the courage of those convictions to sort of have an inclusive society, to recognize that everyone needs to be in the conversation now if we're going to be able to. So everyone in the conversation, I'd be inclined to focus on economic, income and wealth inequality as a starting point, because those societies, those countries that have done a good job in addressing that have created much more vibrant, trusting, resilient societies than the ones that have just stoked GDP for its own sake.
I think that we've had a missed opportunity in this country in terms of not pivoting from CERB to a guaranteed livable income. And so one of the next steps moving forward is we need to let politicians know that. So this is beyond Nova Scotia, of course. But I think that Nova Scotia can make its own decision. Nova Scotia could lead the way. There have been enough pilot projects looking at guaranteed livable wages. I think we learned something from CERB, from how quickly the legislation for CERB happened, and what stopped us as a country from pivoting to a guaranteed livable wage. We need to hold parliamentarians accountable. We need to let them know how we feel. And if Nova Scotia wants to move forward with a guaranteed livable wage, then Nova Scotia can talk to Nova Scotian politicians about that and making that happen. I'll go back to the comment I made earlier. Sometimes our privilege gets in our way. Because, when you're living on an expense account that's more than what some families have in a month, you don't think about it. You don't really think about it. It's not part of your reality. We need to have those realities more visible.
And the best test of that, we do have a guaranteed livable wage called old age security that people can access if they need it when they turn 65. And for people who access old age security who have been food insecure, 50% of them become food secure for the first time in their lives.
That's the sad reality, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a great book called Utopia for Realists, written by Rutger Bregman, about basic income guarantee. And they did a big experiment for years in Manitoba that was fantastic. And one of our researchers, Kathy Ma, is analyzing some of that data right now. The data was never analyzed properly. It's a very important way to go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
This is a really fascinating line of discussion. And it's one of those things that reminds me too, like basic income, a universal basic income, a guaranteed livable wage was something that we were talking about, several, like for a long time now, but it seems like, that there's a light shining on this now. And there's more urgency around the conversation. And I think that's one of the things that COVID has done in a number of sectors and conversations, is sort of taken things that we were talking about already and put them a bit more front and center. I can't help but thinking, because I'm a political scientist, and I won't belabor this, the importance of political will in a lot of these conversations, not only at the provincial level here in Nova Scotia, as we talk, but also federally, municipally, across the board. We have a comment from the audience, an audience member. Thank you for providing this opportunity and sharing your insights. I appreciate identification of quality of life over fiscal success as a barometer of reimagining our future. I am encouraged by celebration of cultural values rather than profit margins. That is a wonderful comment, Laura. It's extremely important. And I think it really captures actually a lot of the intent of the project. Was we wanted not to focus entirely on the economic realities of rebuilding, although obviously that's a huge part, and we've talked about economic inequalities here, and that's a very real piece. But at the same time, we do want to think more broadly than that. We want to be very, aware of, and we want to immerse ourselves in the various ways that Nova Scotians live and work and support and play together. And so I think that's a big part of this piece too. I want to thank so much the panelists tonight. This has been a really, really wonderful session. And I know that we absolutely chose the right people to bring this conversation around Reimagine, the project itself, to a bit of a close, but also I think we absolutely hit the right notes in terms of launching a conversation more broadly, because that was the point really of the project, is not to kind of deliver any major conclusions. The point was to try to set off some debates, some conversations, some dialogues that then can go out and produce new things. And so I really want to thank the three panelists tonight for that. I'm going to take because this is our last Reimagine panel, I am going to take a quick opportunity to thank some very important people who have supported this project from the day one. I do want to thank every panelist from, start to finish. We've had, I guess like 6 times, 3 or 4. We've had around 20 people. And so we really, really appreciate everybody who took time to prepare for this and to come and give their thoughts and give their expertise. It is very, very important that we can share that. And so I think, that's extremely important. Thank you to everyone who participated in a research group. To give of yourself and your time and your knowledge and your expertise to make the province better is hugely generous, and we are all very, very grateful for that. I want to thank every person who has ever logged into one of these sessions, because I know the last thing any of us needs on one level is another freaking Zoom session, but I really appreciate every time that people have logged in and done this, because it's important, and we feel the presence of our audience. We really do. I want to thank Kim Brooks, the Dean of the Faculty of Management. If I had 3 hours, I couldn't explain to you how lucky we are to have Kim Brooks. And if anybody can get a project off the ground, it's Kim. And so I really, really want to appreciate her leadership, how she digs into things. She's always got a smile on her face. She's just wonderful. And so thank you so much for her brilliance and her energy in this project. Thank you to Matt Hebb from the President's Office, because he was a supporter of this from day one. And it's wonderful to know Matt, Alice, when you have the university behind you and you're doing important work, it's wonderful to know that the various parts of the university work together to produce something good. And I think that's a wonderful thing about Dalhousie. And I want to thank, most importantly, Laurie, Nicole, Rose, Corinna, for making this thing happen every time we've done this, because this has been flawless every single time. And I don't know how they all did it, but thank you to the team behind the scenes who produces this every single time. So I think that's it for us. I really want to thank everybody again for giving so much of themselves to this. And I look forward to everything that this project builds on going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. This was a wonderful panel to be on. So thank you.
It was. It was great.